Imagine standing in Africa nearly 200,000 years ago. There are no roads, no cities, no houses, and no water taps. Just you, your group, and a massive wilderness. There are no supermarkets, plastic bottles, or modern water filters. If you need water, you have to find it yourself, and somewhere in this enormous landscape, your next drink is waiting. At first, the thirst is easy to ignore, but as the hours pass, your mouth becomes dry, your body becomes weaker, and one thought starts taking over your mind: water. So you begin searching. You climb higher, look across the horizon, and scan the landscape for anything that might lead you to a water source. Then, in the distance, you notice something that looks like water for a moment. It feels like you've been saved, but getting there is only the beginning of the problem. When you reach the pool, you realize the water is muddy and stagnant. Animal footprints surround it, and something may have died nearby. Would you risk drinking it? Today, we can test water before drinking it. But ancient humans had no laboratory and no way to see microscopic organisms. They had to make decisions with what they could observe. There was no bottled water, no purification tablet, and no warning label. Survival depended on knowledge that could not be written down. It had to be remembered. The real question wasn't simply, where is water? It was, where is water that won't make us sick? And answering that question required paying attention to everything around them. Because for ancient humans, water wasn't just something they wanted, it was something they could not survive without. Every journey was limited by the distance to the next reliable source. Water is not spread evenly across the planet. One area might have rivers and lakes, while another could remain dry for days, weeks, or even longer. Rivers were obvious lifelines. They provided drinking water, attracted animals, supported plants, and created natural pathways through otherwise difficult landscapes. Lakes could offer another reliable source. When ancient humans discovered one, it could become a temporary stopping point where people, animals, and food all came together. But water sources could disappear. A pool that existed during the rainy season might become nothing more than cracked mud during the dry season. That meant ancient humans had to remember. Older members of a group could tell younger people where water appeared, when it disappeared, and which routes were safest. In a world without maps, memory became a map. A particular hill, valley, tree, or rock could remind someone exactly where water was hidden. But what happened when humans entered an environment they had never seen before? They needed new clues, and one of their most useful clues was already moving across the landscape. Animals. Every animal needs water. So ancient humans learned to watch them carefully. If animals repeatedly moved in one direction, that direction was worth investigating. Even footprints could become information. Fresh tracks in dry soil might reveal where animals had recently traveled, and sometimes following those tracks could lead to water. So the human follows them, step by step. The trail crosses the dry ground, and in the distance, something begins to change. Birds could provide another clue. A flock suddenly flying toward one particular area might indicate food, shelter, or potentially water. Ancient humans had to learn the difference, and when many animals gathered in one place, there was probably a reason. Perhaps there was shade, food, or water. The animals themselves became part of the human survival map. But no single clue was perfect. Animals could mislead you. Green plants could have other explanations. So ancient humans had to combine several clues before making a decision. One of the most useful things they could learn was that water follows gravity. Rain falls on higher ground, then flows downhill, collecting in valleys and natural depressions. So a valley could become a destination. As the human walks downhill, the landscape slowly changes. The dry ground begins giving way to more vegetation. Suddenly, there's a patch of green surrounded by dry land. That contrast is important. Plants need water, and unusual vegetation can be a clue that moisture exists nearby. Even insects could provide information. More insects often appear around places where moisture and vegetation are available. To an experienced human, These tiny details mattered. Then he notices something even more interesting. The soil beneath the plants is darker and damp. The surrounding ground is completely dry. But here, something is different. And this raises a fascinating possibility. The water may not be sitting on the surface at all. It could be hidden beneath the ground, waiting to be discovered. Then he finds it. Between a group of rocks, fresh water is flowing naturally from the ground. A spring, clear, moving water in the middle of a harsh landscape. He approaches carefully, then he kneels and drinks. For someone who has spent hours searching, those first few mouthfuls of water could feel like the most valuable thing on earth. The relief is immediate. The thirst begins to disappear. And the human realizes something important. This isn't just water. This could be a place worth remembering. So instead of simply walking away, he studies the surroundings, the rocks, the trees, the shape of the valley. He needs to remember exactly where this spring is. He even makes a simple mark on a tree. It isn't a modern map, but it's a reminder, a physical clue that could help him recognize this place again. Now he has another problem. He knows where the water is, but his group doesn't, so he turns around and begins the journey back to camp. When he reaches the others, he points toward the valley and explains what he found. For the group, this information could be more valuable than almost anything else. The group follows him. Men, women, and children travel across the landscape together, carrying whatever they can use to collect and transport the water. And finally, they see it. The spring is real. Clear water is flowing between the rocks, and the entire group suddenly has access to something essential. They drink carefully, one after another. The water doesn't just satisfy thirst. It gives the group the ability to remain in this environment longer. Then they begin collecting it. Containers are filled, water is carried, and the spring becomes more than a discovery. It becomes a resource shared by the entire group. Now they carry the water back toward camp. Every container is heavy, but every drop is valuable. Water has to be transported because the source isn't always beside them. Back at camp, the water is carefully stored. For a small group living in the wilderness, having water nearby means greater security and more freedom to survive. But perhaps the most important thing happens next. The group shares the knowledge. One person's discovery becomes everyone's survival advantage. Older members teach younger ones what to look for. Animal tracks, green vegetation, valleys, springs, signs that might reveal where water is hiding. And this is one of humanity's greatest advantages. Knowledge doesn't have to die with the person who discovers it. It can be passed from one generation to another. Then the seasons change. The landscape that was once green becomes dry again. Water sources shrink, disappear, and sometimes return months later. Eventually, the rain comes. Clouds gather, water falls across the landscape, and empty depressions begin filling again. The environment transforms almost overnight. Ancient humans learn to recognize these seasonal patterns. They remember which places fill with water after rain and which locations remain useful during dry periods. But months later, the same location may look completely different. The water is gone, the ground is cracked, and only memory tells them that water will return. Eventually, humans begin asking a different question. Instead of only asking where water is, they start asking, can we reach the water beneath our feet? They dig at first. Nothing happens. They keep digging through the dry soil, hoping that somewhere below the surface, moisture is waiting. Then the soil changes. It's darker. It's damp. Beneath the surface is groundwater. Something that was invisible from above has suddenly become accessible. Over time, this simple idea develops into wells. Humans begin lining holes with stones and creating ways to lift water from underground. Now, water doesn't always have to be found at the surface. A person can lower a container, pull it back up, and bring underground water directly to the community. That changes everything. A reliable well can support a group for much longer. People can stay near it. Animals can gather nearby, and food can be grown. And slowly, temporary camps can become permanent settlements. Once humans can control access to water, they can begin building lives around one location. Then comes another revolution: agriculture. Humans begin directing water toward crops, allowing them to produce food in places where nature alone might not provide enough. As food production increases, settlements grow, trade develops, jobs become specialized, communities become cities, and water quietly sits underneath the entire transformation. Thousands of years later, we live in a world where clean water can appear from a tap in seconds. But that simple moment is connected to the ancient humans who first learned to find it. So the next time you drink a glass of water, remember the journey. Before wells, pipes, filters, and cities, there was an ancient human standing in a wilderness, thirsty and searching. They learned to read animals, plants, valleys, seasons, and the ground itself. And that knowledge helped humanity survive long enough to build civilization. Because before humans could build the world we live in today, they first had to answer one simple question: where is the water?